I knew something was wrong with us the moment I was standing in the middle of a Chili's in Austin, holding her jacket and waiting for her to get back from the restroom. It was such an ordinary moment that I still think about how easy it is to miss the exact second your life starts falling apart. Not during some dramatic fight or movie scene, but in that dead space between finishing your burgers and figuring out who's driving home. We'd been sitting there for almost 2 hours, talking about her marketing gig, whether we needed to hit Costco that weekend, plans for the 4th of July. Everything seemed completely normal. No tension, no weird silences, no hint of anything buried underneath. If something had felt off, maybe I would have picked up on it right then. But nothing did, and that's exactly why everything that came after hit me so hard. When we started getting ready to leave, I stood up first and grabbed her jacket from the back of the booth. Something I'd done 1,000 times without thinking. That's when she said she needed to run to the bathroom real quick to fix her makeup, that she'd be back in 2 minutes. So I just stood there by the table with her jacket in my hands. It was maybe 90 seconds of waiting. Nothing unusual, just killing time, checking my watch, thinking about traffic on I-35. And that's when I felt it buzz. Her phone was in the inside pocket. The vibration was strong enough that I felt it through the fabric, and I automatically reached in because I figured the phone might fall out when she put the jacket back on. I was just going to hold on to it until she got back. I pulled it out, and the notification lit up the screen right then. I didn't unlock it or try to read anything. But the message popped up plain as day, and my eyes just locked onto a few words that seemed weird at first, then froze me completely. It was from a woman. No hey, no how are you? Just pure venom. The text was all accusations and threats, with this clear subtext that left zero room for neutral interpretation. This woman was saying she knew what was going on, that she wasn't going to let anyone destroy her family, that if this didn't end immediately, there would be serious consequences, and that my girlfriend knew exactly what she was talking about. At the end of the message, there was a mention of a man, not by name. Just, my husband. And that one word made me feel this cold sensation in my gut, like I'd accidentally walked into somebody else's mess that somehow connected to the person I went home with every night. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, trying to process what I was even looking at. First thought, some kind of mistake. Second thought, maybe this was someone else's drama that somehow ended up on her phone. But the way it was written, like they'd already been going back and forth, like this woman wasn't guessing but actually knew what was up. I read it again, and the longer I looked at those words, the more this anxious feeling built inside me, starting small but getting heavier by the second. I didn't open the thread, just locked the screen and held the phone, trying to get my head straight because I didn't want to jump to conclusions right then. And that's exactly when she walked back up. She came over, took the jacket from my hands, said we should get going. I looked at her and caught myself doing something strange. Like for the first time in forever, I was actually studying her face for something I'd never noticed before. But she acted completely normal, seemed calm, even smiled a little. We walked out to the parking lot, got in my truck, and the whole drive back to our place in Round Rock was dead silent because I couldn't make myself start the conversation, and she apparently didn't feel like anything had changed. I drove and kept replaying that message in my head, trying to find any explanation that wouldn't completely wreck my reality. I kept telling myself maybe this was work-related, maybe some jealous coworker situation, maybe a misunderstanding that got blown up. But the more I thought about it, the more questions kept coming. When we got home, she started acting like she always did. Chatted about random stuff, talked about her plans for tomorrow, asked me about my shift at the fire station. I tried to listen, tried to act normal, but inside, this one thought kept looping. I'd seen that message, and I knew I couldn't just pretend I hadn't. I tried to wait it out, tried to convince myself to think it through before making a scene, but after a while, I knew I couldn't hold it in. I asked her, told her I'd seen something on her phone, said I wasn't trying to snoop, but the notification popped up when I pulled it from her jacket, and I just asked her what it meant. Her reaction wasn't what I expected. She seemed surprised at first. Then she actually laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not defensive. This light chuckle, like I'd brought up something ridiculous. She said it was some guy's wife from her office. Explained they had this joint account they were working on, that they spent a lot of time together because of it. Late nights at the office, working through campaigns. Said this woman was super jealous and paranoid, that she was always accusing her husband of cheating and sending these kinds of texts to any woman who worked with him. Said there was nothing between her and this guy. Just co-workers, normal work situation. She said it all calmly. No tension, no defensiveness. And that actually made me feel relieved for a second, because her explanation made sense, and because I wanted to believe her. But then I noticed something that stuck with me. When she finished explaining, she looked at me like she expected the conversation to be over, like I should just accept what she said and drop it. And that's when this quiet feeling started in my gut that there was something about this story I wasn't getting yet. I didn't know then that feeling was about to get a whole lot louder. After that night at home, things gradually seemed to go back to normal, at least on the surface. She acted like herself again. Our conversations went back to regular. No weird tension in the apartment. After a while, I almost stopped thinking about that message from Chili's, because your mind can adapt to anxious stuff if there's no new evidence that something's actually wrong. I didn't check her phone, didn't bring it up again, didn't try to dig deeper because her explanation had sounded calm and logical, and I decided to give the whole thing a chance to just fade out of our lives. Because if you're constantly looking for proof of suspicion, you can destroy any relationship even without real reasons. Weeks went by, then a month, then another, and at some point I figured it really had been a misunderstanding. No new weird signals. She came home at normal times, talked about work, sometimes complained about being exhausted, sometimes mentioned tough deadlines on the campaign. Everything looked like normal couple life with no serious problems. But about 4 months later, I started noticing small things that seemed insignificant at first, but gradually formed this strange picture, because the changes happened slowly, almost invisibly, which is why I didn't give them weight initially. I noticed she started getting ready differently for work. Before, her morning routine was pretty simple. Quick shower, light makeup if any, comfortable clothes, out the door. That always seemed totally normal to me because her job didn't require any special dress code. But then things started shifting. First, I noticed she was spending more time on her hair. Then more makeup products showed up. Then I saw this red lipstick she almost never used before because she'd said it was too bold for a regular workday. Then I started catching the scent of perfume she used to save for nice dinners or nights out with friends. And these details repeated almost every day. Every morning she looked like she wasn't just going to the office, but to some event where making an impression mattered. At first I tried not to read into it. People change. Sometimes they just start taking better care of themselves. Sometimes they want to update their look. But that small crack was already inside me from that night at Chili's. So every new detail automatically started raising questions that never would have occurred to me before. I started watching her behavior more carefully. She still talked about working a lot, sometimes staying late, sometimes mentioned that same coworker from before, but always in neutral terms, just someone she had a project with. And all of it sounded calm enough that I couldn't justify blowing up. But inside, this feeling kept growing that I was missing something. At some point, I decided to do something I never would have done before. I decided to talk to someone from her work. Not directly about suspicions. I knew if I started asking pointed questions, it'd get back to her and destroy whatever trust was left. So I remembered she had this friend from high school, Jessica, who also worked at the same firm. They mentioned each other a lot, sometimes got drinks after work, sometimes discussed office stuff at our place. I figured a conversation with her might at least give me a general sense of what was actually going on in her work life. I texted Jessica and suggested meeting up. The excuse I came up with was pretty simple and harmless. I said my girlfriend's birthday was coming up, and I wanted to surprise her at the office, have something waiting when she got in to make her morning. Said I needed someone from her office to help me figure out the best way to set it up. The excuse seemed believable enough. We met up a few days later at a coffee shop near the Domain. At first, the conversation really was light and neutral. I asked normal questions about how the workday flowed, how the office was laid out, when would be best for the surprise, who usually came in early, what kind of team traditions they had. She answered calmly, no tension, and for a while I thought this whole meeting would be useless, that I wouldn't learn anything new. But then the conversation gradually drifted toward regular office gossip, because people at work always talk about each other, joke around, share impressions about coworkers. And that's when I decided to ask something that sounded as neutral as possible. I just asked who my girlfriend was working with most these days, because I wanted to understand who might help me pull off this morning surprise. She named a few people, and among them was a man's name I'd heard before. That same coworker from the joint project. She said his name completely calmly, but then added one detail that immediately shifted the whole conversation. She said this guy was spending a ton of time with my girlfriend at work now, that their campaign had basically become his main focus, and that people in the office were even joking about how he literally never left her side. She said it without any malicious edge, more like regular office banter. But then she added one more thing that gave me that familiar cold feeling inside. She said this guy was clearly trying really hard to impress her. Said it was obvious to everyone. Said he was constantly helping her, doing parts of her work, bringing her coffee from the Starbucks downstairs, finding excuses to talk, and that sometimes it came across as really intense attention. And that's when I understood that night at Chili's hadn't been some random thing with a jealous woman who texted everyone. Because now this story had context. There was a person. There was attention. There was an explanation for why my girlfriend had changed so much these past months. I sat across from Jessica, pretending to keep talking about birthday surprises, but inside that same feeling from when I first saw the message on her phone was creeping back. The feeling that my reality was cracking again. And that's when I understood something unpleasant. I still didn't know if anything was actually happening between them. But now I knew for certain this story was way more complicated than she'd tried to make it sound that night. After meeting with Jessica, I walked around for days with this sense that some quiet anxiety mechanism was constantly running inside me that I couldn't shut off, because apparently I still didn't have direct proof. But there were too many hints to keep living like nothing was happening. Jessica and I agreed we'd actually do the birthday surprise at my girlfriend's office, and I specifically insisted I wanted to come early and check out the space beforehand, figure out how to set everything up to be as beautiful and unexpected as possible. I supposedly wanted her to walk into this perfect moment she'd never forget. The plan sounded so natural that Jessica didn't get suspicious, and she said it was a good idea because then we could figure out where to put flowers, where the cake should go, where people would gather, how to make sure my girlfriend didn't notice anything ahead of time. I agreed and said it'd be best to come a few days before her actual birthday, when she'd be busy in another part of the office, so I could look around and plan everything. Really, I had one goal. I wanted to see her work life with my own eyes. I wanted to see this guy. I wanted to understand if there was actually something more happening between them than just work conversations. When the day came, I got to the office earlier than most people started work, because Jessica said she'd bring me through the service entrance where fewer people were, so my girlfriend wouldn't accidentally see me early. I remember that feeling walking through the office hallways, because it was strange, like I was invading this part of her life that had always existed completely separate from me. Jessica showed me where the team usually gathered, where the coffee station was, where they had their quick stand-up meetings, and it all looked like a totally normal open office where people were busy with their own stuff and not thinking that a few feet away someone else's personal drama was unfolding. At some point, we got near this open area with the workstations. Jessica said quietly that my girlfriend was sitting over there, but she was busy working right now, so we should go a bit further and circle back so she wouldn't spot me early. But right then I saw her anyway. She was at her computer. Standing next to her desk was a guy. I knew immediately it was him. He leaned in so close their heads were almost touching, like he was showing her something on her screen, and they were laughing quietly, glancing at each other, saying things to each other. It looked like this intimate space between two people who were way too comfortable together. And that was the first hit. Because this wasn't work communication. This was something else. I felt this heavy feeling rising inside that was hard to control. So I told Jessica I needed to step away for a minute, that I wanted to check another part of the office where we could set up the surprise table. I went to the far wing of the building. It was the quietest part of the office, where the server rooms and utility spaces were, where regular employees hardly ever went. I stood there for a few minutes trying to calm down, because inside me anger was already mixing with humiliation, and I knew if I gave into it now, this would end in an uncontrollable scene right in the middle of the office. So I decided to just wait a bit and then head back. But as I was walking down the hallway, I accidentally saw this door leading to a small service balcony, right in this remote part of the office. And that's where I saw them again. They were standing together. Each had a coffee cup in their hands, talking quietly, like people in a place where nobody's supposed to see them. At some point, he put his arm around her. She didn't pull away, didn't even seem surprised, just stood there next to him, and between them was this closeness that had nothing to do with marketing campaigns. And then they kissed. It was a quick kiss, but there was no doubt about it. Not some accidental moment. This was something normal for them. In that second, something inside me seemed to break completely. All the explanations I'd tried to invent these past months, all the attempts to believe her words, all the doubts, everything disappeared at once. Only one simple reality remained. My girlfriend was standing on a service balcony at her office kissing another man. I don't remember exactly how I took those few steps. I just walked out onto that balcony. They noticed me almost immediately, and the expression on their faces in that moment, I'll probably never forget it. This instant of complete shock. He stepped back almost automatically, like he instinctively understood he needed to disappear from this situation as fast as possible. She was looking at me, trying to process how I was even in this place. The first thing she said wasn't an excuse. She asked what I was doing there. The question came out so sharp and unexpected that something inside me snapped completely, because seconds before I'd watched her embrace and kiss another man, and now she was looking at me like I was somehow violating her personal space. I told her the truth, said I'd come to do a birthday surprise, said I'd come here to set everything up early so she'd have a great morning, said Jessica had helped me get into the office, and that apparently I was the one who got surprised. After that, the scene started. And that's when I understood that whole story that began with one message on her phone months ago had finally shown its true face. When I walked out on that balcony and they saw me, none of us could speak normally those first seconds, because this was one of those rare moments when truth walks into a room without warning and without any way to hide it, and people just don't have time to invent the right words to defend themselves. He stepped back almost automatically, like he instinctively understood he needed to disappear from this situation as fast as possible. She was looking at me, trying to process how I was even in this place, because her eyes in that moment showed less guilt than confusion that her world had suddenly collided with mine. The first thing she said wasn't an excuse. She asked what I was doing there. The question came out so sharp and unexpected that something inside me snapped completely, because seconds before I'd watched her embrace and kiss another man, and now she was looking at me like I was somehow violating her personal space. I told her the truth, said I'd come to do a birthday surprise, said I'd come here to set everything up early so she'd have a great morning, said Jessica had helped me get into the office, and that apparently I was the one who got surprised. After those words, what started was hard to call a conversation. It was this mix of excuses, accusations, attempts to minimize what was happening, and my own attempt to keep myself from just turning around and walking away. Because inside me, rage and humiliation were rising together with this sense that the last few months of my life had been some strange illusion. She started talking really fast, said I was getting everything wrong, that this was just some stupid moment, that there was nothing serious between them, that it was just office flirting that got out of hand, kept repeating that it didn't mean anything. Said it over and over, like she hoped if she said it enough times it would start sounding believable. I looked at her and understood that minutes before I'd seen a completely different picture with my own eyes. The guy had been standing there the whole time, barely saying anything, because for him this situation was even more awkward than for her. And at some point he just said he should go, then quickly left the balcony and disappeared down the hallway. And that's when everything finally exploded into a full scene. We were talking louder than people should talk in an office. I was asking direct questions. She was trying to dodge them. I asked how long this had been going on. She said it wasn't what I thought. I asked why there was that conversation with his wife then. She said that woman was just jealous and blew everything out of proportion. But the longer this went on, the clearer it became that people were starting to appear around us. An office is a place where news spreads faster than anywhere else. First, a few employees appeared in the hallway. Then someone peeked out from the conference room. Then I noticed Jessica standing a little ways off, looking like she'd just realized she'd accidentally become part of a huge problem. At some point, it became clear that half the floor understood what was happening. People weren't approaching, but they were watching. And that's when the scene stopped being just our personal story. It went public. I watched this expression appear on people's faces when someone realizes that rumors they'd thought were just office jokes were actually true. Somebody probably thought there was just light flirting between them. Somebody maybe suspected more, but now it was happening right in front of them. And this couldn't be hidden anymore. At some point I understood I didn't want to continue this conversation in this place anymore, because every new word just sank me deeper into humiliation happening in front of dozens of people. I just said the conversation was over, said I wasn't going to make a scene at her job, and that I'd already seen everything I needed to see. After that, I left. I don't remember exactly how I got out of the building. Just this strange, empty feeling inside, because sometimes after a hard emotional hit, a person stops feeling anything specific. Only this sense that everything inside had gone very quiet. That same night, I packed my stuff. It wasn't some dramatic decision made after long reflection. It was almost automatic. I just understood I couldn't be around this person like nothing had happened. So I left. The days after were strange. She called. She texted. At first, her messages were short and tense. Then they got longer. Then explanations started appearing in them. Said everything had gotten out of control. That she hadn't meant to destroy our relationship. That she'd gotten confused. That she'd realized how important our life together was to her. After some time, she suggested meeting with a couples therapist. Said she wanted to try to fix everything. That these kinds of crises sometimes happen in relationships. That people can get through them and keep the family together. Said she loved me. Said she'd realized it too late. But the problem was that something had already happened inside me that couldn't be undone. I didn't feel like fighting for this relationship. Didn't feel like analyzing it with a therapist. Didn't feel like going back to a life where I had to constantly doubt the person next to me. And the strangest part was I didn't feel anger toward her. Just exhaustion. Exhaustion from trying to figure out where exactly everything had gone wrong. And that's when I understood one simple thing. Sometimes relationships end not because people stop loving each other. Sometimes they end because trust breaks so completely that a person no longer wants to check if it can be rebuilt. After that day at the office, my life shifted into this strange waiting mode, because on the surface, everything continued. Work, regular stuff, conversations with buddies, plans for the near future. But inside, I constantly had this sense that one chapter of my life had ended, and the next one somehow hadn't started yet. The first weeks after I moved out were the hardest, not because of loud scenes or constant talks, but actually because of their absence. Because sometimes silence weighs more than any emotion. I was living separately, in a small rental in East Austin. And at some point I started understanding that the strangest part of infidelity isn't the betrayal scene itself, but how abruptly your normal life structure disappears, the one where everything used to be clear. She kept texting me almost every day, sometimes short messages just asking how I was, sometimes long texts trying to explain what had happened, why everything had gone so far, why she hadn't stopped earlier. Sometimes attempts to talk about the future, like there was still some path between us we could go back through. I read these messages but rarely answered right away, because inside me that emotional reaction she probably expected wasn't there anymore. No desire to yell, to work things out, to demand explanations. All of that had stayed back on that office balcony, where truth had become too obvious. She said that after the scene at work, everything had changed, that people started talking about them, that she'd had to explain herself to management, that the whole office had basically flipped over this story, because many people until the very end had thought there was just light flirting between her and that guy. Normal workplace chemistry that happens between people who spend a lot of time together. But after I appeared on that balcony and everything became obvious, that illusion disappeared for everyone. I listened to her and understood that at some point her life had started falling apart too, just for different reasons. But inside me, this barely changed anything anymore. After some time, she brought up the couples therapist again. At first I refused. Then she asked again. Said she understood how badly she destroyed everything, that she wasn't expecting instant forgiveness from me, but wanted to at least try to understand what had happened between us. Because she couldn't just accept that our life had ended with a scene on a work balcony. Kept repeating that she loved me, that this whole story had made her realize how important our relationship was to her. I thought for a long time before answering, and at some point I agreed. Not because I believed her words, but because I wanted to put a period on this for myself, without leaving inside that feeling that I hadn't tried something. We still live separately now. Sometimes we meet for these therapy sessions, where people usually try to recover what cracked inside a long time ago. Sometimes the conversations there sound calm, sometimes heavy. Sometimes the therapist asks questions I don't want to answer, because the answers don't actually change anything anymore. She says she's ready to work on the relationship, says she wants to rebuild trust, says she understands how badly she ruined everything. I listen to this and understand one thing that's become completely clear these past months. I don't feel trust anymore. And the problem isn't even that kiss on the balcony, or the message from the jealous wife, or those months when she went to work getting ready like she was going on a date. The problem is that after all this, I look at her and don't feel that calm that used to be the foundation of our relationship. I constantly think about how easy it all was to hide, how long I lived with someone who was already living another life. And when I think about this, I understand I don't want to spend years trying to glue together what inside me already fell apart a long time ago. So now, even sitting in these therapy sessions, I catch myself more and more often thinking that this process for me isn't the beginning of a new chapter, but just the slow closing of the old one. She hopes we can recover everything, and I'm increasingly convinced that sometimes it's more honest to end a story immediately than to stretch it across months and years, pretending the past can be rewritten. And that's probably why I've almost made my decision. I'm going to close this cycle and finish this chapter of my life, without stretching it further, because sometimes the hardest decision is simply recognizing that some things can't be taken back, even if both people really want to believe it's still possible.